need to be. The holiday that you all call Thanksgiving is coming up. I've always called it Thanksgiving, and people used to get mad at me because we would do radio on Thanksgiving Day, and I'd be calling it Thanksgiving. People say, Mark, stop saying that. You're upsetting everybody. That's not nice. And, and then people even say to me, black folk don't celebrate it the same way white folk do, so we don't. I said, well, then we shouldn't be calling it Thanksgiving either. I always said Thanksgiving. That's what I called it. And so as this holiday comes forward, rather than wait until the last minute, we're doing this today. We're going to talk about our sisters and brothers. And it's also kind of timely because I was reading, as you all know, I was reading Lawrence O'Donnell's book. And he talks about one of the first stops that Bobby Kennedy made in late 67, early 68, when he was considering running for president, was to North Dakota to visit the Native American tribes there. And he talked about equality for our sisters and brothers who were indigenous people. Bobby Kennedy did that in 67 and 68, as a matter of fact. So joining us now here, no strangers. These are my go-to folk when we talk about issues of indigenous people. First of all, on the line, and folks, we're on social media, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all make it plain. Y'all retweet us. Queen YoNasDa is on the line, just fresh off of her national stop police brutality weekend in Atlanta a few weeks ago. Queen, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning. I just dropped the phone. Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? Why are you dropping the phone? You okay?
It's early.
It is early in the morning. You doing good, though?
I am doing very well. National Stop Police Brutality Weekend was really, really good. And thank you again for having the families on. And as you know, Jason Perro, a 14-year-old Native American young boy, was just murdered by the police a couple of days ago. So, this fight is not, we have to continue fighting and bringing awareness of even what's happening throughout Native communities and really in our communities as a whole, as well as cultural training and for the police officers. So, but the platform that you gave us was beautiful. So thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you for your work and what you're doing. Also in studio with us, my main man, Big Indian Gyasi. What's up, brother?
Oh, man.
What size is this sweater?
It's a XL. It's an XL.
Man,
I appreciate it.
What's up, man? We got to talk. You need to leave that with me.
See, you got to stay warm.
You all are indigenous year-round. When people see me, they don't see indigenous.
Right.
We see you, you see indigenous. You need to give me that sweater so I can represent y'all.
No,
because you got some more at home.
I got a bumper sticker for you.
I can't wear no bumper sticker.
No, but it's
Queen, you watching us on social media? Look at this sweater he got on. Tell him to get this to me.
Oh, I already know that Gyasi's coming through with something either pink or something purple, something bright.
Yeah.
Tell him to give me this sweater.
We can talk. We can negotiate.
Okay.
Make a treaty.
In the spirit of the man March, Queen YoNasDa knows this. We would give each other the clothes off one another's back. That's how meaningful that was. But
see, he's pulling rank right now. He's trying to be slick.
So we just want to have this conversation. Folks, feel free to join at 866-99-SERIOUS. What does this holiday, Queen YoNasDa, or as it's called a holiday, but it really isn't, is it? First of all, how do you all term it? You term it a holiday, a day of mourning, a holy day of mourning. What should we even? How should we even refer to this?
It's
day?
a national day, in the words of Russell Means, he proclaimed it as a national day of mourning, because of the way Thanksgiving was taken, especially from the tribes of the East Coast, and so. But today in 2017, we do honor our ancestors. It is a time where Native families do come together. And but it is a national day of mourning. And we have to always, remember those that were slaughtered on Thanksgiving, and the land that is still being taken from the U.S. government. And so, yeah, it is a very heavy day as well. But this is us 365, though. Even though we talk about, I was just on your show for Christopher Columbus Day, and then now, the month later is now Thanksgiving, which is the national. So we always try to rename what they really are, what these days are. But this is how it is 365 days out the year in regards to a constant reminder when we see so many cultural appropriation and disrespect to Native people and the Native culture.
866-99-SERIOUS, 866-997-4748. We also have another very special guest joining us in the studio. Big Indian Gyasi, please introduce our guest. Why don't you introduce us?
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Why don't you tell us who
Well,
she is?
Fortunately, we are blessed in within Native communities, just like every community, to have young, brilliant people. All that right. People say they're future leaders, but they're not. They're leaders today.
Yeah. And
absolutely have to, they're inheriting the world that we've created and the world that we're creating. And it's necessary. We see this with the Black Lives Matter movement. We see this within Standing Rock, where young folks took the lead and said that, we're tired of this narrative that's been told, and we disagree with this narrative, and we want to tell a different story. And these young folks are our most powerful storytellers because they haven't gotten used to certain transgressions against us and seeing certain things that we've taken for granted. There's no disrespect to us. It's no disrespect to preceding generations, but it's just saying that we have gotten used to things that young folks have not necessarily seen and have not necessarily said, I'm cool with this.
Right.
And my sister right here, she's definitely one of those people. Sorry for getting off mic for a second. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, Sego Skanaguego. My name is Rana LaPine. I am Mohawk, and I live in New York City. Thank you so much for your kind introduction. Sorry I'm a little late, always running on Indian time. But yeah.
Y'all have that too?
Oh, always.
It's like,
well, it's officially people of color time.
Well,
people of color too. So.
But Indian time is like twice people of color time.
Really?
Yeah, true story. Because there's just a dearth of clocks and technology within a lot of our communities, and a lot of times no urgency to get to certain places.
Yeah.
I mean, I tried to get here by like 6:40, and I still wound up being 15 minutes
Right.
late. So
well, it is early. In the
and
morning.
I'm Blackfeet. We run on double Indian time. There's mathematics involved.
Well, what does that say about the Queen on the phone? Because she's, Black and Native American, right? So,
you know what? I'm on various moons and various suns.
Yeah.
I'm triple late just because I'm on both sides.
but honestly, even when I go to the continent of Africa, there's just a different space-time continuum.
Yeah.
In other parts of the world, even in the South,
Right.
like I'll say, I'll be back after a while.
Yeah.
And that has
Cool.
right.
and everybody say, okay,
Right.
but it has no specific time or meaning or space, so we
Doesn't
get all
have
that.
to.
Glad you could join us.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are Mohawk.
Yes,
You are here. You live here in New York?
I do. I've only been here for about a year and a half or so.
Okay. Tell us about some of your work and your activism.
So I guess I don't know if I'd really define myself as an activist because I definitely don't like I mean, I am like active, but I think that's not fair to the people who are really leading that work,
Okay.
I'm definitely like supporting them, but I wouldn't it's probably not fair to them to refer to myself as an activist because I'm not, leading those things. But so here I'm reasonably active in the Native community. I do try to go to certain events, things like that. I would say more so I try to support and not only in New York City with urban natives, but also in terms of the change makers around this country and Canada and all around the world, really, standing up and taking these huge risks for our people who are really out there just trying to make a better life for everyone who's Indigenous. So I just try really hard to be supportive, and thankfully that's how I was able to meet Gyasi and know a little more about his work. And yeah, I'm not really sure what else to say about that.
What we're talking about, folks, as we are dealing with this day of mourning, and I just asked Queen YoNasDa her perception of this day, how she approaches it. Let me let you go back to you, Big Indian Gyasi. this day that is called Thanksgiving, that I call Thanksgiving. Talk to us about your perspective, you and your family for that matter, and how you have always addressed it.
Yeah. We have a slightly different take. I think oftentimes we give white people too much credit. White people didn't make up the concept of Thanksgiving.
Right.
All of us at some point in history go back to small communities, to tribal communities, where there was a harvest. And native communities that were dependent upon harvest, just like indigenous people around the world, have had forms of Thanksgiving and ceremonies for Thanksgiving during the harvest season. That's the reason why Thanksgiving is when it is, because it's the end of the harvest season. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't something that natives inherited from pilgrims or Europeans. It's, in fact, the other way around, that it was something that the native people, the Wampanoags, I used to represent the Quina Wampanoag, and I mean, these ceremonies, these go back quite a long ways. I mean, at least traceably, and then, probably a lot longer before that. So I don't like to give white folks too much credit. I like to say that, instead, this is something that we've always done. Now, this particular manifestation of Thanksgiving, the commodification of Thanksgiving, this day commemorating on one particular day, I think, and I can't speak for anybody else, but one thing that I have noticed, I travel to a lot of native communities every single year. It's like a lot of things. It's like when somebody says, I'm slipping into middle age, and now people will give me the weird compliments. They'll say like, you look good for your age. And that's a mixed compliment because it's like, okay, well, do I look good, or is it just this contingent upon, upon this particular?
You know better than me. I don't even get that. I don't even get you look good for your age. Go ahead.
But Thanksgiving, Native American Heritage Month, which we're in, the month of November even, are mixed compliments. So these, what it is it's complicated. Yeah. It's complicated because on one hand, as YoNasDa referenced absolutely correctly, there's this sordid history that goes along with our communities in relationship to this day, in relationship to our interactions. I'm not xenophobic, Mark. I love white people. You know what I mean? I'm cool with white people. Okay. I'm not xenophobic. I love the aliens that came here. But at the same time, it does commemorate an ugly point in that history. That's absolutely real. On the other hand, there's this very real history of us having these ceremonies, these beautiful ceremonies. Moreover, there's this very real history of us making something beautiful and making something inherently indigenous out of something that was intended to destroy us. Like this holiday. Okay, we're going to turn this into a time of reflection. We're going to turn this into a time of mourning, if that's what it is. We're going to turn this into a time of family, when in fact we're not even supposed to be here. And that's very, very indigenous, where you turn something beautiful like stew, where we got these horrible, horrible ingredients from the United States government after they killed 60 million buffalo in attempts to exterminate us. And yet we're going to make something really, really good out of these horrible ingredients. That's what we do.
Or fry bread.
Or say it again.
Or fry bread.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Fry bread with all of the ingredients that we got from that too. But fry bread is really good.
Rana, am I pronouncing it correctly?
You are, yeah.
What about you? What's your take on this? What we call this holiday?
I agree completely with Gyasi. I think, in one hand, we have to remember that this, fake commercialized version that was put into place, of course, by Abraham Lincoln, who, had the Dakota 38 and was definitely no friend to natives. That is not something worth celebrating, right? And it's really important to remember the history of this, supposed event that never really took place, of celebrating, based in the celebration of genocide. But at the same time, as was just said, as Indigenous people, we are so used to constantly giving thanks. As a Haudenosaunee person or someone who's part of the Iroquois, we have our own version of a Thanksgiving address that has nothing to do with the fake holiday, but that we're supposed to give as often as possible, where we thank our ancestors, we thank everything we eat. So everything from trees to herbs to plants to animals to water to thunder, everything. And we talk about coming together as one. And that's really deep rooted in who we are as people. And that sort of giving thanks and coming together and celebrating our resilience and the fact that like just existing is a sign of resilience, that is like purely indigenous. But putting it into the terms that have sort of been spread here by colonizers and by settlers and this sort of fake, oh, we should be thankful and try to come together and ignore this history, is definitely not. And so I think it's really important to sort of balance them, whether as an indigenous person, if you choose to, completely ignore that day on your calendar altogether, I support it. If you choose to go to the day of mourning out on the Cape with the Wampanoag and a couple other local Massachusetts tribes, like that's another way to do it. Or some people do choose to come together and, not celebrate it in the way that's suggested, but just focus on the beauty of being an indigenous person and giving back and having that gratitude and, the day off work. So.
And I love pumpkin pie, damn it.
Exactly.
Pumpkin pie is tasty.
So you've just made it clear that you love white people and pumpkin pie.
Uh-oh.
I didn't say I love white people. I said I'm not xenophobic. I don't dislike white people. There's a difference. See, this is some journalist stuff. He's trying to put me into a corner. But yeah, I like some. I like George Michael. I love George Michael. Yeah.
It's a little random.
Ric Flair. But the white people I do love. There's a list.
It's like when people
And
talk
George,
about
and
their
George
one
Michael's
native
the top of
friends.
your list? Okay,
George
that's
Michael's
cool.
the top of my list.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know he's no longer with us, right?
God bless the dead.
Okay. All right. 866-99-SERIOUS, 866-997-4748. Folks, your thoughts and reactions about Thanksgiving, or as I like to call it, Thanks-taking. Queen YoNasDa, how, what would you say to people listening who want some guidance in terms of how they should observe this day, how they should think about this day? Those who, in particular, who are not Native American, who are not indigenous people, who are questioning themselves, wondering what direction they should take, what lead should they take, what should they do? Are there things they should read? Are there places they should go? Talk to us about what advice you would give people who are listening.
I was reflecting on that on last month because being Black and Ogallala Lakota, I'm always saying I feel like I'm the oppressed under the oppressed. And the reason why I say that, because when we look at Black History Month, McDonald's as well as a lot of major corporations do 365, where, on their products or something is some type of Black history fact. And Native American Heritage Month happens to be in the month of Thanksgiving. And so I don't want for those that's listening to just take the day to learn more about Native people, but take the year. Each day, take out of the year, find something, whether it's a past or present influential Native person, an influential part of history. There is so many signs as you drive through your community of names that is a Native name. What tribe does that come from? Who is that?
Yeah.
These are the things that I feel that will move us towards of that we're still here. We're not extinct.
Yeah.
We're not just a monument. We're not just a street sign. And we're not just a mascot. We're more than that, and we're still here. And so I think that is the biggest frustration that I have, because I'm like, man, we go all out for Black History Month.
Yeah.
We have Native politicians. I mean, I'm not a Native politician. I'm sorry. We have Black politicians. We had a Black president. We have so many, we have so much that people can learn from Black people, and we demand it as Black people. Our ancestors demanded it. Like, no, you're going to recognize us. We are going to vote. But not until, my mother was a part of the boarding schools in South Dakota. And there is where she was taken away from her family, and she was basically whitewashed. By force. And this happened all the way up until the 90s in many indigenous communities all around the world. And no one doesn't even know this part of the history until the 90s, like in Australia, in Canada in the 80s. You know, a lot of people doesn't even know this. And so I think that it's really, really key, especially now after the movement of Standing Rock, where we was out there and saying, we are still here. You're not going to continue to take our land for whatever your greed is. And I think that that is something that, so on the day and even before the day, even today, begin to research Native American authors.
Right.
Begin to research not just past, but from present stories. We have over 500 federally recognized and non-federally recognized tribes within the United States. What are these tribes? That means that not all of us are in buckskins and headdresses. Not all of us are in teepees. Not all of us look at buffalo as our animal, and no, we don't. I mean, I know my tribe. I don't know about all the other tribes, but I know we don't believe, like, we don't have a spirit animal, you know. So it's these different things that I feel that more and more people need to educate themselves. So when we're talking about, I hate the word allies. I look at people as distant relatives or their relatives.
Yeah.
And I feel that we need to begin to start to close, you know, our language is very key in regards to understanding one another. We say Gyasi, or some tribes say Gyasi, which means we are all related or all my relations. And in order for us to really, really understand we are all related, we have to have intertribal relations, but we also have to have our distant relatives' relations and understanding one another.
Yeah, very well put. 20 minutes before the hour. What about you? What do you? Well, first of all, let me ask you this too, Big Indian Gyasi. What's the latest on Standing Rock?
The latest is that there's oil flowing. That the Dakota Access Pipeline is been fully executed. There are legal appeals that have been that are in different states throughout the appellate process, but oil is flowing. And you know, Mark, I look at most things through the lens of a storyteller. Native people, indigenous people around the world, the best storytellers in the world. That's kind of just how we've always transmitted information. And some folks would take that as a sign of defeat, that story was unsuccessful. But you know what's interesting about that, just regarding Dakota Access Pipeline specifically, is that there's many other pipelines that are flowing throughout the United States. And those young folks and those women who started the resistance to the Dakota Access Pipeline, they've inspired a whole generation of water protectors, of pipeline resistors. There's folks that are protesting in real time every single one of those pipelines, from Philadelphia to Iowa to down in Texas, and that's powerful. When you have, and so these stories are bigger than that. When you take the lens out just a little bit to abstraction, you see that this was an amazing story that literally is going to change the narrative of our relationship to our fossil fuels. And that's powerful. Regarding, excuse me, your question about informing folks about Thanksgiving, you know, honestly, we have a war of symbols that's going on right now. We see that in regards to Colin Kaepernick and the national anthem and the flag. Those are just symbols. Nobody cares about that stuff in the real world, where, excuse me, they don't put food on anybody's plate. They don't pay anybody's rent. They don't kill anybody. But they're symbols of what is sacred to us, what is important to us. The Robert E. Lee statue in Charlottesville, is that important to you? Is the national anthem that was written by Frank Scott Keys in 1812, when women, black people, native people were not citizens, and he was a slave owner, and he excuse me, was part of Andrew Jackson's kitchen cabinet that pushed native people westward and committed genocide and you know, killed thousands and thousands of people from the Eastern Seaboard. Is that symbol going to be important to you? And we're fighting this war of symbols right now, and it's important, but at the same time, it's only symbolically important to the degree. There was last week, there was a tragedy on the Bad River Indian Reservation where a 14-year-old boy who was seeking help called 911, Jason Perro, and was killed by law enforcement. And the fact is, as a matter of empirical data, Native people are killed by law enforcement at rates that are completely disproportionate to our population size, the highest rates in the nation. Moreover, Native kids and black kids are kicked out, expelled, suspended from schools at the highest rate of anybody in the country, which is the closest the shorthand for the criminal justice system. Later on, having contact with the criminal justice system, some folks call that the school to prison pipeline. These travesties, my point, these travesties are also happening in real time. It's not just Thanksgiving. It's not just this moment in yesteryear, but instead we continue to be overlooked, undervalued, and that leads to further traumatization. That leads to further marginalization. So what can people do? Read the news past the headlines.
Yeah.
Focus on the local stories. Focus on that there are communities that are absolutely still suffering as the result of this colonization that Rana spoke about. That it's not something that happened, just during boarding schools, but instead is still happening today in our schools, where school is still seen as a place of punitive measures and not educational measures for both Native students and black students.
Yeah. 866-99 series, 866-997-4748. Well, Rana, I was going to ask you another question, but I'm going to come back to that. I'll put the same question to you. You kind of alluded to it about what people maybe doing on the Cape and whatnot, and you even mentioned Massachusetts, as you said, Queen YoNasDa, how a lot of these names come from your people, Mannahatta. Someone, and I know I'm going to probably not say this properly, but someone called me once and told me the proper pronunciation for Massachusetts. Do you know it?
No, I do not.
I believe it's Massachusetts. I think is the indigenous pronunciation. I may not have that exactly right, but you mentioned a couple of things like that. But anything else you would add that you would like to see people, because undoubtedly people who are listening to this are listening to it because they're curious, they want to be enlightened, they want to be educated about what is and what isn't appropriate, and rather than just be, I think it's important to be constructive as opposed to just be bitter or resentful or mad and then still go eat some turkey. I'm mad, but I'm eating turkey. I have an attitude that has, power to the Native Americans. Give me something to eat. But what else would you encourage people to think about and do on this day?
Sure. So the first thing that I think is really essential and that people can do anytime, anywhere, is find out whose land you're on. That's the number one thing that I think is so simple to do, right? Like right here in New York, we're in Lenape land. A little bit of like the Delaware tribe went up here, a couple others, Ramapo, and etc. But all of us are existing in someone else's land, right? And as Indigenous people, we know that land is connection to our ancestors. And just because now, we might have these skyscrapers, which of course were built by Haudenosaunee iron workers. But, we might be in this developed, quote unquote, constructed land, but it's still someone's homeland. Whether or not people are here currently from that tribe, which they are, right? There are Lenape people here. Just because there's not a reservation here doesn't mean that there aren't Lenape people actively trying to get people to recognize them. So that's the first thing. And that goes for those of us who are urban Indians too, right? Like if you're living in a different tribe's land, we still have to pay that respect. Secondly, find out what's happening near you, right? Like not everyone has the means to be able to travel. I'm grateful to have been able to go out to Standing Rock for a little bit of time, but I recognize that a lot of people who greatly, greatly cared about that didn't have the means or the time to be able to get out there. That doesn't mean that you can't support either local Indigenous things happening around you right now or things that are happening far away, right? There's everything from being careful who you give your money to, not investing in any of these corporations that are either funding prisons or pipelines or any of a million different things. There's also just generally supporting things near you, like I said before, in terms of local activity. So look into what Native Cultural Center near you or what Native activists near you are doing. There are, about 2 million Natives in the country, I think, statistically. I guarantee you that there is something happening near you. Maybe it's not specifically about Thanksgiving itself, but there's an opportunity for you to support and learn from people who are really doing change in Indigenous communities, including urban Indigenous communities. So I would say those are probably the two biggest things that anyone can do, whether you're at home and you don't know where to start. I would say, look up whose land you're on and find out what's happening near you and how to be supportive.
866-99-SERIES, 866-997-4748. Folks, give us quick calls, not a lot of time left. I never, Queen YoNasDa, how really people always gave the term tribal or tribalism or tribalistic a negative connotation. But because I was always respectful of indigenous culture, I always wondered, what is the deal with that? And we know that a lot of this language and a lot of these things, pseudo-intellectual things that are put forward by the Europeans themselves. So as our sister here was just talking about the tribes, and they would say that's even to those of us indigenous to Africa, y'all tribalistic, don't be tribalistic, and all of that. But, Africa today is not reflective of the indigenous people in terms of the geographic boundaries. These states in America are not reflective of the indigenous people when it comes to geographic boundaries. So as you said, whose land are you on? The Lenape people didn't say carve out New York. It is bigger than what New York is. It is a different boundary line. So, even as a young person, and I was always resistant and getting in trouble and whatnot. When we used to sing in church, Jesus loves little children, red and yellow, black and white, I would get in because I leave the white out. And you'd say all the words, Mark. Red and yellow, black and black, they all precious in his sight. But black didn't rhyme with sight.
It didn't rhyme, no.
Right. So, but that's what I would do. But so when people would say tribalism, I say, but our tribes were our nation states. Like you got 50 states.
Yeah.
We had 50 states. So there were states within this nation, and our scholarship has also shown that people here were not barbaric and savage and uncivilized. They had systems of government and civilization and commerce and what have you. So I never have liked the negative connotation that has been used, Queen YoNasDa, when it comes to the word tribalism.
Yeah, it is a negative, but this is all going down to, steps of decolonization, like exactly
Right.
what you said, understanding what tribe really means. And we are various tribes, but we are of different various nations. Just
Right.
like my sister that's in the studio right now, she just said that she comes from the Iroquois Federation, which is a nation. And then within that nation, she is Mohawk. So me, the Oceti Shakoi, which is the great, I hate to use the word Sioux now, but this great Sioux nation. And so within that is the Lakota and Dakota people, and the same with Gyasi. He comes from a nation. What is the name of your nation, Gyasi?
I'm Skapi Pukani.
Exactly. So I can't pronounce it. So, but exactly. So within that is all of his various tribes within that nation.
Right.
When I took the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan to the Navajo Nation in 2006, or I think 2006, 2007, and we went, and he was the first non-Navajo to ever speak to address the Navajo Nation Tribal Council. And when he asked that question, do I call you all a reservation? Are we on a reservation? Are you a tribe? And then the president at the time, he said, no, we are a nation. We're the Navajo Nation. And that's exactly the respect level that they demanded. Like, no, we are a nation. We have our own government system. We have our own tribal presidents, and we have, everything is within the tribe of exactly like how you're in the United States or United States. Within these nations is a nation. We are nations within nations. And we do have our own government system. We do have our own tribal police. We have all of these things within in our nation.
Yeah. 866-99. Let's get a quick call in for Queen YoNasDa, Sister Rana, Brother Gyasi. Mel's in Arkansas. Mel, God bless you. Good morning. Get ready for impeachment. Go right ahead.
Good morning, Mark. One of your hosts was sitting there talking, and when you asked her, what tribes she was from, she said Ogallala.
Yes.
And it's kind of funny because I'm a truck driver and I go all over the U.S. I've been to 45 U.S. states and 2 Canadian provinces, and I've been through Ogallala, Nebraska, and it's one of those names that sticks out in your mind. You never think about, and she's sitting there talking. She's from the Ogallala tribe, and I'm like, oh my God, that's where this name come from. I've always wondered. And y'all were talking about going different places and looking at the actual names that really come from Native Americans, and that's not joking. I mean, there really is a lot out there, that we don't realize. I go all over the U.S., and it's kind of funny because when I get into western Nebraska, Wyoming, those areas like that, it always humbles me because of the history that's in the ground.
Sure.
I always wonder who was there, where, what was their life like, and all that. And, it's just really cool that she brings that up, and I'm sitting there and it puts the puzzle together on a little bit more,
Yeah.
But I would like to say one thing. I think it's really important that everybody go out and make friends with a Native American person. I had a former guitar player in a band that I used to jam with. It's just a garage band and all that. We never went nowhere, but he was Sioux and Blackfoot. And it's amazing some of the things that, as a white person, you don't realize that is offensive. And a prime example is, and please forgive me for using this word, but saying Indians. He took offense to that. He was like, we're not Indians, we're Native Americans.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that until I became friends with a Native American and found out. And if you want to broaden yourself, go out and meet people. Meet Native Americans, meet different tribes, different people. Because, I mean, it always blows my mind when you go through the areas where the tribes are located.
And you see the names.
And
you see all the names. You all feel the same way about the term Indian, right?
No.
You're not offended by Indian.
Definitely not. I mean, it's a generational thing. It is. Yeah, you could talk to anybody that's post, 50, 60 years old. That's the language that they're comfortable with. And they're first of all, it's a legal terminology. So any program
legal.
Any program that's designated by the United States government is American Indian, Alaskan Native. So and number two, any of those are kind of misnomers. Native American, they all are problematic. They all have different baggage attached to it.
Because this really ain't supposed to be called America either, to be honest with you.
No, that's right.
That's why I prefer indigenous. What about you, Rana? How do you feel about the term Indian?
I mean, I'm not a huge fan of it, but I understand it is generational. To me, I do sort of find myself, if someone's like, oh, you're an Indian, I sort of fire back immediately, like not just sort of as a reflex of like, oh, well, I'm Mohawk or I'm Native. But to me, like introducing myself as my tribe or referring to other natives by tribe is really like what matters most. But I also see like usually people, if someone's using it in like a derogatory way, that's different than like, so I can see both sides of it.
Like the Cleveland Indians.
Right.
Or the Doggone, or the Washington Redskins, or the Chicago Blackhawks, or the Florida State Seminoles, or the Atlanta Braves. I'm leaving anybody out?
Chiefs.
The Kansas City Chiefs. All that's got to go. Thank you for your call, Mel. Appreciate you. But Queen YoNasDa, something that Wabunini actually told me years ago. Vernon Belcourt. God rest his soul.
Yeah.
He was on the air with me, and he said, people assume that the term Indian, came from Columbus thinking he was in India and being lost. And that's where you get the West Indies and all that. Okay. But Wabanini said that there's another theory out there.
Indios. Yeah.
You know about that? You shook your head though. You don't believe that?
Nah, not at all. It doesn't make sense chronologically. Indian. I mean that was, in fact, Columbus directly from his journal. That was he made no reference to that.
Indios,
yeah.
right.
I mean it sounds cool.
And it does sound, yeah. Well, just to finish the story, that is El Español for of God, and the theory was that when Columbus saw you people.
Hell
you
yeah.
all was so beautiful.
We're fly.
He said, these people must be of God.
Yeah.
Indios. So it sounded good when he said it.
And if you look at the descriptions from Columbus's journal,
right?
He talked about the nice stature, muscular, tall, brown skin. I mean, yeah, that's pretty godly, But at the same time, I wish it were true. It just doesn't make sense chronologically given Columbus's journal.
All right, so he's contradicting the ancestor, Queen YoNasDa. I'm gonna leave that with him.
It's just history.
I'm gonna take a quick break. We got to take a break as we discuss this holiday and have the proper perspective. Big Indian Gyasi in studio with us. Rana, LaPine.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Queen YoNasDa on the phone. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Thanks, taking. We're talking about it here on SiriusXM Progress, Resistance Radio. Get woke, get ready for impeachment. This is MIP.
Never give up. This is Resistance Radio, and these are your sounds of freedom.
Those of you watching on social media, we are in a commercial break, and we will be right back, and then you'll hear the rest of the show. And I hope you are enjoying and learning from this. A lot of us as African Americans like to run around and worship and fall behind these Buffalo Soldiers, but we need to cut that out too. Okay, I hate to hurt anybody's feelings, but Buffalo Soldiers were doing the government's bidding and bringing harm and slaughter and death to Native Americans, to indigenous people. I'm sorry, that's just what it was. So don't be running behind no Buffalo Soldiers and paying tribute to them. I know a lot of people want that to happen, but that's totally inappropriate. So if you got Buffalo Soldier pictures in your house, at least on this holiday, cover them up. Put a blanket or something over them. I don't know. Yeah. If you can't take them off the wall, I'm telling you, take them off the wall. But
hey, and God bless them. They were they were not in a good position. They were stuck between a rock and a hard place, and that happens. You had members of the 5 civilized tribes, to quote 5,000 civilized tribes, that, as a matter of historical record, owned slaves.
Yeah, that's true.
And that wasn't. They were trying to show how civilized they were, so they didn't have to move westward.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, the oppressed will often take on the role of the oppressor,
That's right.
Unfortunately. So we're clear on that. So let's just clear out all of that Buffalo Soldier stuff.
Please.
This is MIP. Get woke.
All right. 866-99 Sirius. Well, we're really just about out of time. I do want to thank my very special guests for spending this time with us. Wabanini used to spend this holiday with me every year. We would talk about these sports teams. We developed a very close relationship. His brother Clyde spoke at Dick Gregory's homegoing.
Absolutely appropriate.
As those you want to hear on, we were
Legends.
talking on the social media, but not on the radio. All you black folk running behind these Buffalo Soldiers, y'all need to cut that out. It's one thing. It's one step you can take right away in terms of this. So please, ma'am, please, sir, do that. And learn more. Read. As I always say, read. They Came Before Columbus by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. And you will read the story of Abu Bakari, who established trade relations from the great kingdom of Mali with our indigenous sisters and brothers in the 1300s, centuries before Columbus got here. Rana, Gyasi, Queen YoNasDa, thank you all very, very much for being with us today, okay?
Thank you, Mark.
God bless
Thank you so much.
All right, and you all observe thanks-taking. We'll be back. This is MIP.